Blood ties were supposed to mean everything, but to her brothers, Gloria was merely a bargaining chip to settle a multi-million-dollar debt. Sold to the most ruthless alpha in the Pacific Northwest, she expected a death sentence. She never suspected the monster waiting in the dark had already worshipped her in his dreams. The mahogany doors of the Russo family's corporate office clicked shut, the heavy sound echoing like a judge's gavel. Gloria Russo stood in the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Across the expansive glass desk sat her eldest brother, Damien. Beside him, leaning against a towering bookshelf filled with leather-bound ledgers, was Vincent. The air in the room was thick with the suffocating scent of burnt ozone and bitter coffee. The distinct pheromone signature of alpha wolves backed into a corner. The Russo family, leaders of the Iron Grip Pack, were bleeding out. Their legitimate front, a massive logistics and freight empire operating out of Seattle, had been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. Worse, their pack territory was shrinking, poached by stronger, more vicious rivals. Gloria had known things were bad. She had seen the encrypted messages on Signal, heard the hushed, panicked phone calls in the dead of night, but she had never imagined the solution they would orchestrate. "Sign the paperwork, Gloria," Damien said, his voice stripped of any brotherly affection. He slid a thick stack of legal documents across the desk. The seal at the top belonged to Jonathan B. Aris, a high-profile, notoriously ruthless paranormal mediator based in downtown Seattle. These weren't just business contracts. They were binding blood pacts. "What is this?" Gloria asked, her voice trembling as she stared at the dense legal jargon. She caught the bolded figures. A $45 million wire transfer to offshore accounts, the cessation of territorial hostilities, and a transfer of living collateral. "It's a buyout," Vincent muttered, not meeting her eyes. He took a long drag from his cigar, blowing the smoke toward the ceiling. "We struck a deal with the Obsidian Ridge Pack. They back off our shipping routes, they clear our debts, and we merge bloodlines to ensure a 50-year peace treaty." Gloria's blood ran ice cold. The Obsidian Ridge Pack. They were led by Andrew Kincaid, an alpha king who had seized power by tearing out his own uncle's throat in a challenge circle 5 years ago. He was a phantom, a corporate titan who ruled the shadowed forests of the Pacific Northwest with an iron fist and a heart of absolute frost. He wasn't just a werewolf. He was an apex predator who bought out failing packs and assimilated them, breaking the weak and discarding the rest. "Merge bloodlines?" Gloria whispered, her amber eyes darting between her brothers. "You're marrying someone off? Who?" Damien stood up, his jaw ticking. He planted his palms on the desk, leaning forward until his dominant aura pressed against her like a physical weight. "You, Gloria. You leave in an hour." Andrew Kincaid agreed to the financial bailout on the condition that he receives an unbonded female of the Alpha's direct bloodline to serve as a hostage bride. "You are going to Snoqualmie Pass tonight." "You sold me," she breathed, the horrific reality crashing down on her. "I am your sister. You sold me to a monster for a wire transfer." "We saved this family," Damien roared, his eyes flashing a dangerous, feral yellow. "Do you think we had a choice? Kincaid's enforcers had us surrounded. It was either this, or he burns our warehouses to the ground, with our pack members locked inside. You will do your duty to this family, Evie. You will go to his estate, you will keep your head down, and you will ensure he honors the treaty." Gloria lunged toward the desk, her own wolf clawing at the surface of her skin, demanding a fight. "I won't do it. I'm not a piece of property you can just trade away." Vincent moved with preternatural speed, grabbing her arm and twisting it behind her back, just enough to immobilize her without breaking the bone. "It's already done, Evie. Jonathan Orris notarized the blood pact an hour ago." If you run, you break the treaty, and Kincaid will slaughter every man, woman, and child in the Iron Grip pack. Is that what you want? The blood of 100 wolves on your hands?" Tears of hot, furious betrayal spilled down her cheeks. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a hollow, gnawing despair. They had trapped her perfectly, using her loyalty to the innocent pack members against her. An hour later, Gloria found herself shoved into the back of a matte black 2024 Mercedes G-Wagon. The rain was coming down in relentless, freezing sheets as the convoy merged onto Interstate 90, heading east toward the treacherous, fog-draped mountains of Snoqualmie Pass. Damien and Vincent rode in the front, their silence a cowardly shield against the weight of what they had just done. Gloria stared out the tinted window, watching the city lights blur into a dark, endless expanse of pine trees. She gripped the leather seat, trying to calm the frantic pacing of her inner wolf. She was heading into the lair of a killer, a man notorious for his cruelty, a man who viewed her as nothing more than a receipt for a $45 million purchase. She vowed in the darkness of the SUV that she would survive Andrew Kincaid. She would endure whatever hell he put her through, and one day she would make her brothers pay for their treason. Deep in the jagged, isolated peaks of the Cascades, the Obsidian Ridge estate loomed like a fortress, built of brutalist concrete, black steel, and massive walls of reinforced glass. It was a testament to the untouchable wealth and power of Andrew Kincaid. Andrew stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his massive study, a glass of expensive bourbon forgotten in his hand. Below him, the rain lashed against the floodlit courtyard. He was a towering figure, his broad shoulders and scarred physique wrapped in a bespoke charcoal suit. His jaw was clenched, his slate-grey eyes fixed on the winding mountain road, waiting for the headlights of the Russo convoy. He hadn't bought the Russo girl for peace. He didn't need the Iron Grip pack's failing shipping routes, and $45 million was a drop in the ocean of his wealth. He had bought her because he intended to slowly, methodically crush Damien and Vincent Russo. They were arrogant, sloppy, and had recently dared to disrespect one of his border patrols. Taking their sister as a hostage bride was supposed to be the ultimate humiliation, a power play designed to break the brothers' spirits before he legally dismantled their logistics empire anyway. He didn't care about the girl. She would be given a wing of the estate, a heavy guard, and ignored. But Andrew had a weakness, a secret buried so deep within his hardened soul that not even his most trusted enforcer, Garrett, knew of it. For as long as Andrew could remember, since the violent, bloody days of his adolescence, he had been haunted by a dream. Night after night, amid the nightmares of blood and war, a woman would appear in the sanctuary of his mind. She had cascading dark hair, fiery amber eyes, and a small, delicate crescent moon birthmark just beneath her left collarbone. In his dreams, she was his anchor. His wolf would purr in her presence, wrapping around her in absolute submission. The scent of her, a sharp, intoxicating blend of fresh petrichor and crushed cedar, was seared into his very DNA. He had spent years subtly looking for her, hiring private investigators to scour pack registries across the globe. He had found nothing. He had resigned himself to the fact that the Alpha King was destined to be mateless, haunted by a ghost of his own mind's creation. "Alpha!" Garrett's voice crackled over the intercom on the desk. "The Russo convoy has breached the outer gates. They are pulling into the courtyard now." "Bring them out into the rain," Andrew commanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that demanded instant obedience. "Let the brothers get wet. I'll be down in a moment." Andrew set his glass down. It was time to play the tyrant. He descended the grand, floating staircase of the mansion, his boots making no sound on the polished slate. When the heavy double doors were pulled open by his guards, The freezing mountain wind howled into the foyer. Out in the courtyard, the black G-Wagon was parked, engine idling. Damien and Vincent were already out, their expensive coats soaked, looking thoroughly miserable and intimidated by the dozen heavily armed Obsidian Ridge guards flanking the perimeter. "Andrew!" Damien called out, trying to project strength over the sound of the storm, but his scent reeked of sour fear. "We brought her. The contract is fulfilled." Andrew stepped out onto the covered portico, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He didn't radiate his aura. He didn't need to. The sheer, terrifying stillness of his presence was enough to make both Russo brothers take an involuntary step back. "Bring out the collateral," Andrew said coldly. Vincent moved to the rear door of the SUV and pulled it open. He reached in, grabbing a slender arm, and yanked Gloria out into the pouring rain. She stumbled, her boots slipping on the wet cobblestones, but she quickly caught her balance. She didn't cower. Despite the rain instantly soaking her hair and clothes, she stood tall, her chest heaving as she glared up at the massive, terrifying man on the porch. And then the wind shifted. A gust of air blew directly from the courtyard up to the portico. It hit Andrew like a freight train. Petrichor. Crushed cedar. Andrew's heart stopped dead in his chest. His wolf, a massive, violent beast that usually required immense willpower to keep chained, suddenly let out a deafening howl inside his mind, throwing itself violently against the bars of his ribcage. "Mate." Andrew froze, his slate-grey eyes snapping down to the woman standing in the rain. Gloria brushed her wet, dark hair out of her face, shivering from the cold, but her gaze was pure, defiant fire. Her eyes, those exact breathtaking amber eyes from his decades of dreams, locked onto his. As she moved, the collar of her jacket shifted, and there, pale against her damp skin just below her collarbone, was a tiny, perfect crescent moon birthmark. The world seemed to drop out from beneath Andrew's feet. The tyrannical Alpha King, the corporate butcher of the Pacific Northwest, felt the air vanish from his lungs. It was her, the ghost from his dreams, the woman he had searched the earth for, and she had just been handed to him as a pawn by two men he fully intended to destroy. He saw the bruise forming on her arm where Vincent had gripped her too tightly. A sudden, blinding, murderous rage flared in Andrew's chest, so intense it made the rain around him seem to hiss and evaporate. His claws began to push painfully through his nail beds. He wanted to leap off the porch, tear Vincent's arms from their sockets, and rip Damien's throat out right there on the cobblestones. He wanted to wrap Gloria in his coat and burn the world down for daring to touch her. But Andrew was a king, a master strategist. He realized the precarious nightmare he was suddenly in. If Damien and Vincent realized what Gloria truly was to him, his fated mate, his one and only weakness, they would never let the buyout stand. They would use pack law to demand the contract be voided, dragging her back to Seattle to use her as a hostage against him. He had to play the monster they expected. He had to secure the cage before he let them know who held the keys. Andrew forced his claws to retract, burying his earth-shattering revelation behind a mask of absolute, chilling indifference. He slowly descended the steps, walking into the rain until he was standing mere feet from Gloria. She held her breath, staring up at him. She was terrified. He could smell it. But her bravery was magnificent. "She's small," Andrew said, his voice flat, turning his gaze to Damien. "I suppose she will suffice for the treaty's terms. Garrett, have the transfer papers brought out. I want these two off my land in 3 minutes." Damien looked relieved, stepping forward to sign the digital tablet Garrett thrust at him. "The money." "Wired to your Swiss accounts as we speak," Andrew lied smoothly. In truth, the money was held in a complex escrow that Andrew could freeze at any moment. Now get out of my sight, Russo. If I see your vehicles on this mountain pass again, I won't bother sending a warning." Damien and Vincent didn't hesitate. They signed the tablet, gave their sister one last, guilt-ridden glance, and scrambled back into the G-Wagon. The heavy tires spun on the wet stone as they sped out of the courtyard, abandoning her to the dark. The heavy iron gates clanged shut in the distance. The courtyard fell silent, save for the drumming of the rain. Gloria stood shivering, wrapping her arms around herself, bracing for the cruel tyrant to drag her into his dungeon. Andrew looked down at her. The mask of the cold Alpha King cracked just a fraction. He stepped forward, shrugging off his heavy bespoke suit jacket, and gently, almost reverently, draped it over her trembling shoulders. The jacket swallowed her, radiating his immense heat. Gloria flinched, looking up at him in utter confusion. The monster's eyes weren't cold anymore. They were entirely consumed by a storm of dark, obsessive devotion. "Come inside, Gloria," Andrew said softly, using her name for the first time, a name he felt he had known for 1,000 lifetimes. "You are safe now, and your brothers have absolutely no idea what they have just done." Gloria had braced herself for a damp, freezing cellar. She had expected rusted iron bars and the cruel laughter of guards. Instead, she awoke the next morning in a bed the size of a small swimming pool, swathed in Egyptian cotton and heavy silk duvets. A fire crackled warmly in a massive stone hearth across the room, casting dancing orange shadows against walls adorned with exquisite oil paintings of the Cascade Mountains. She sat up, her muscles aching from the tension of the previous night. The oversized charcoal suit jacket Andrew Kincaid had wrapped around her was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Even from several feet away, it radiated his scent, a dark, intoxicating wave of cedar, rain, and raw power that made her inner wolf whine with a strange, confusing longing. A soft knock at the heavy oak door startled her. A kindly, older man with silver hair and a worn leather medical bag stepped inside, escorted by Garrett, the towering head enforcer. "Good morning, Miss Russo," the older man said, offering a gentle smile. "I am Dr. Hamilton, the pack physician. The Alpha requested I look at your arm. He was quite displeased to see you were injured during your transport." Gloria blinked, pulling the duvet up to her chin. "Andrew sent you? For a bruise?" "The Alpha King is very particular about the well-being of those under his roof," Dr. Hamilton replied diplomatically, though Garrett scoffed quietly in the doorway, crossing his massive arms. "The boss nearly tore the steering wheel out of his own truck after your brothers left," Garrett muttered, his sharp gaze softening just a fraction as he looked at her. "He gave orders that you are to have the run of the West Wing. You aren't a prisoner here, Gloria. The doors are unlocked. The kitchens are at your disposal." Over the next 4 days, the sprawling, brutalist mansion became a bizarre, gilded cage. Gloria wandered the endless corridors, the expansive libraries, and the glass-walled conservatories overlooking the misty valleys. True to Garrett's word, no one stopped her. The pack members she encountered dipped their heads in profound, almost reverent respect, a stark contrast to the disdain she had endured back in Seattle under her brother's tyrannical rule. Yet Andrew Kincaid himself remained a ghost. She only saw him in the evenings, from a distance, pacing the courtyard with his lieutenants or staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private study. Whenever their eyes met, across the vast expanse of the estate, the air between them grew impossibly heavy, charged with a magnetic, electrical current that made her breath catch. He would stare at her with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, his slate-grey eyes dark and unreadable, before forcing himself to look away. Gloria's confusion morphed into a burning curiosity. He was the butcher of the Pacific Northwest. He had brought her to torture her family. Why was he treating her like porcelain? The answer came on the 5th night. A brutal thunderstorm rolled over the peaks, rattling the reinforced glass of the estate. Unable to sleep, Gloria left her suite and wandered the darkened halls. She found herself standing outside Andrew's private study. The heavy mahogany door was left slightly ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling onto the slate floor. She pushed the door open, expecting to find him brooding over pack logistics. The room was empty. However, scattered across the massive oak desk were dozens of charcoal sketches. Drawn by a compulsion she couldn't explain, Gloria stepped up to the desk. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The sketches were all of a woman. Some were rough, frantic strokes of charcoal, capturing a fleeting expression. Others were meticulously detailed, shaded with profound care. The woman was laughing in one, looking over her shoulder in another, and sleeping peacefully in a third. It was her. Gloria stared in absolute shock. The artist had captured the exact curve of her jaw, the specific wave of her dark hair, and, most chillingly, the delicate crescent moon birthmark resting just below her collarbone. With trembling fingers, she picked up a heavily shaded portrait. In the bottom right corner, a date was scrawled in Andrew's sharp, aggressive handwriting. It was dated 5 years ago. "I tried to burn them." A low, gravelly voice echoed from the doorway. Gloria gasped, spinning around. Andrew stood in the frame, the shadows of the hallway clinging to his broad shoulders. His chest heaved as if he had run up the stairs, and his eyes were completely black. His wolf pushed entirely to the surface, fighting for control. "How?" Gloria whispered, clutching the drawing to her chest. 5 years ago. I was still in boarding school. We had never met. How do you know my face? Andrew stepped into the room, kicking the door shut behind him. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I have known your face since I was a teenager, Gloria. You have haunted every time I closed my eyes. You were the only peace I had in a life built on violence." He crossed the room slowly, his immense presence suffocating the space between them. He stopped mere inches from her, looking down with a terrifying vulnerability that shattered his ruthless reputation. "You bought me," she breathed, the pieces of the puzzle colliding in her mind. "You didn't buy me to punish Damien and Vincent. You bought me because you are mine," Andrew growled softly, lifting a trembling hand to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His knuckles grazed her cheek, and sparks of pure, undeniable heat exploded across her skin. Her inner wolf, battered and suppressed by years of familial abuse, suddenly roared to life, howling in joyous recognition. "Mate. When I saw you standing in the rain," Andrew continued, his voice breaking, "when I smelled the cedar and the storm on your skin, I nearly slaughtered your brothers on the cobblestones. But I had to protect you. If they knew you were my fated mate, they would never have honored the blood pact. They would have used you to bleed me dry, or worse, they would have hurt you to punish me." Tears pricked Gloria's eyes. The monster she had feared was a phantom. The man standing before her was a king who had built an empire, only to lay it completely at her feet. She reached up, placing her small hand over his broad, scarred one resting against her cheek. "They sold me," she whispered fiercely, "but they didn't know they were sending me home." Andrew let out a shuddering breath, the restraint he had maintained for 5 days finally snapping. He pulled her against his chest, his mouth crashing down on hers with a desperate, starving intensity. The kiss tasted of bourbon and devotion, a fierce claiming that sealed the fractured pieces of her soul. She wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back as the storm raged outside, the thunder masking the sound of 2 shattered wolves finally finding their peace. Peace, however, was a luxury the Russo brothers would not allow. 2 weeks later, the illusion of their victory shattered. Damien and Vincent sat in their Seattle high-rise, staring in horror at the financial screens. The $45 million escrow account, holding the buyout funds from Obsidian Ridge, had been abruptly frozen. Worse, their southern shipping depots had been simultaneously raided and seized by Andrew Kincaid's enforcers. The phone rang. It was Bentley, a mid-level manager in the Iron Grip pack who occasionally fed them gossip from the mountains. "You idiots!" Bentley hissed over the encrypted line. "You didn't sell Kincaid a hostage. You sold him his Luna. The whole pack is preparing for a mating ceremony. He's going to make her Queen of the Northwest." Damien crushed the phone in his hand, his face purple with rage. If Gloria was Andrew's fated mate, the power dynamic completely shifted. By ancient pack law, a blood relative could contest a mating if the dowry contract was proven fraudulent before the ceremony was finalized. They had a loophole. They could drag her back and demand half of Kincaid's territory in exchange for her freedom. By midnight, a heavily armed convoy of Iron Grip wolves arrived at the fortified border of the Obsidian Ridge territory. Damien and Vincent stood in the freezing fog, flanked by 24 of their deadliest fighters. Standing across the invisible boundary line was Andrew Kincaid, flanked by Garrett and an army of shadows. Beside Andrew, standing tall and wrapped in a heavy fur cloak, was Gloria. Jonathan Orris, the mediator who had brokered the original deal, stood in the neutral zone, his briefcase in hand. "The contract is void," Damien shouted across the clearing, pointing a clawed finger at Andrew. "You acted in bad faith, Kincaid. You hid the mate bond. As her alpha and bloodkin, I invoke the retraction clause. Gloria comes back to Seattle with us, or this treaty burns." Andrew didn't flinch. His aura rolled off him in crushing waves of dominance, forcing several of the Iron Grip wolves to their knees. He looked at Damien like a god looking at an insect. "You have no right to her. You forfeited her." "She carries the Russo blood," Vincent snarled. "Gloria, get over here! You are a Russo! You belong to this pack!" Gloria stepped forward, leaving the protective shadow of Andrew's massive frame. She didn't look at the ground. She didn't tremble. The frightened girl they had shoved into an SUV was dead, replaced by the Luna of the most powerful pack in the state. "I belong to no one but myself," Gloria's voice rang out, clear and lethal in the frigid night air. "And I choose him." She turned to Jonathan Orris. "Mr. Orris, what is the penalty for an alpha who knowingly sells pack collateral without disclosing the pack's impending financial ruin?" Jonathan adjusted his glasses, consulting his documents. "Under the High Council's laws, that is classified as terminal fraud. The injured party is entitled to immediate recompense of all assets." Gloria looked back at her brothers, a cold, merciless smile touching her lips. "You froze the accounts," Damien whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "I did," Andrew said, stepping up beside his mate, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "Your warehouses are mine. Your shipping lanes are mine. Your empire is gone, Damien. I bought your debt, and now I am foreclosing on your lives." Panic erupted in the Iron Grip ranks. The wolves behind Damien and Vincent began to back away, realizing they had been marched into a slaughter under false pretenses. They were bankrupt, leaderless, and facing the wrath of an alpha king. "You can't do this," Vincent screamed, shifting halfway into his wolf form, his eyes wild with terror. "It's already done," Gloria said, turning her back on her former family. "Garrett, escort the trespassers off our land. If they cross the border again, execute them." Andrew watched with dark satisfaction as Damien and Vincent were dragged away by their own disillusioned men, stripped of their titles, their wealth, and their sister. They would spend the rest of their miserable lives as rogues, wandering the outskirts of a territory they once claimed to rule. The fog began to lift as the sun broke over the jagged peaks of the Cascades, casting brilliant gold light across the ancient forest. Andrew turned to Gloria, his expression softening entirely, as he looked at the woman who had conquered his nightmares and brought dawn to his shadowed life. He dropped to one knee in the damp earth, taking her hand and pressing a reverent kiss to her knuckles. "My mate," Andrew swore, his voice echoing through the silent, listening woods. "My Luna. My everything." Gloria smiled, pulling the terrifying, beautiful Alpha King to his feet, knowing finally, unequivocally, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The girl traded for corporate debt never returned. In her place rose a fiercely devoted Luna, ruling the Pacific Northwest beside the Alpha King, who had spent a lifetime dreaming of her face. Damien and Vincent's betrayal ultimately destroyed their own empire, sealing their ruin. Out of a cruel, transactional nightmare, Gloria found a terrifyingly perfect love, and a kingdom that would burn the world to keep her safe.